I glanced over at my husband Mark as he drove our rented U-Haul down the highway. We had just dropped off our only daughter Sophia at her college dorm, where she was starting her freshman year. It seemed like only yesterday that I found out I was pregnant with her, just after my high school graduation. Mark and I had been high school sweethearts, the prototypical all-American couple, he the star quarterback, me the head cheerleader. Our families couldn't have been more overjoyed when we announced our plans to get married and start our lives together, despite the unplanned pregnancy. Mark was forced to take a year off from college to work multiple jobs and save money for our new family. I'll never forget the pride and joy in his eyes the day Sophia was born, or the tireless hours he spent studying late into the night after coming home from double shifts waiting tables. He sacrificed so much in those early years to provide for us, determined not to let me and our daughter down as a provider and husband. After earning his architecture degree, Mark landed a junior position at a prestigious firm in our hometown of Westbrook, Connecticut. As the years went by, he rapidly climbed the ranks through sheer hard work and talent. Still, even as his career took off and the money started flowing in, Mark never lost his humility or down-to-earth nature. Family always came first for him, no matter what. Looking at him now, I saw flashes of the bright-eyed, ambitious young man I fell in love with. The boyishly handsome face had matured into that of a distinguished gentleman. Yet his warm, patient eyes and easy smile remained unchanged, a comforting constant in the ever-evolving journey of our marriage and family life. "The house is going to feel so empty without her," Mark said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. There was a tinge of melancholy in his familiar baritone voice. I smiled sadly, reaching over to rest my hand on top of his. "She's always been a daddy's girl. Your little princess. Our princess," he affirmed, squeezing my fingers. "And she deserves the world." A heavy pause filled the car before Mark asked, "Did you notice how she's been acting recently? The way she treats you sometimes." I stiffened, my smile fading as I pulled my hand away from his. An invisible wall seemed to materialize between us in that moment. "You mean ignoring me completely unless you're around? Then she's all smiles with you but shoots me dirty looks behind your back?" I couldn't hide the bitterness creeping into my tone. Mark let out a weary sigh. This wasn't the first time we had danced around this particular issue. "Oh, come on, honey. She's just struggling with this transition, leaving home for the first time after being so coddled here. Senior year was rough on her, with all the pressure of college applications and trying to live up to those Harvard legacy dreams of hers. You know how she gets when she's stressed. She takes it out on the people closest to her. Try to give her a break." I bit my tongue, not wanting to argue further and spoil the melancholic but still tender moment between us. Especially not now, when it felt like everything was finally falling into place after such a tumultuous beginning. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text, desperate to escape the tension. "We'll be home in about 20 minutes. Come over as soon as you can?" A reply dinged less than a minute later. "Can't wait to see you, gorgeous. Be there soon." I smiled to myself, that old familiar thrill dancing across my skin. 15 years of marriage, yet the promise of an impending tryst still made me feel like a giddy, love-struck teenager. "Who's that from? Sophia?" Mark asked, glancing over at me curiously. "No, it's Maggie," I lied smoothly, the fib rolling off my tongue with well-practiced ease. She was asking how Paul is handling the night shifts at the precinct. Apparently, he's been putting in a lot of overtime lately with that big case he's working on and she's feeling neglected. Maggie and Paul Davis were our closest couple friends, drawn together by the shared experience of being high school sweethearts like Mark and me. Paul had been the star wide receiver on Mark's football team, while bubbly, effervescent Maggie had been one of my fellow cheerleaders. Our chemistry was instantaneous from the moment we were first introduced at a party. The four of us were an inseparable clique all through college and beyond as our relationships blossomed into marriages. "Well, she knew what she was signing up for, marrying a detective," Mark remarked with a shrug. "His job has to come first sometimes, especially when he's closing in on solving a big, important case like this one." I simply nodded, letting the subject drop as I was prone to do whenever Paul came up in conversation. My feelings about the man had grown increasingly complicated over the years, warped by a confusing mix of resentment, jealousy, and tangled emotions I could never admit to Mark or anyone else. Eager to change the subject away from our friends, I gazed out the window at the familiar suburban scenery flashing by, silently counting down the miles until we would be back in our upscale neighborhood. As Mark turned onto our tree-lined street, my breath caught in my throat. There it was, the modern architectural masterpiece he had designed and built for us. Our dream home, with its sleek lines, vaulted ceilings, and walls of windows overlooking the manicured grounds. Yet in that moment, my eyes were drawn not to the expensive trappings of our material success, but to the dark shape of a police cruiser parked haphazardly in our circular driveway. Mark pulled up behind it as two figures emerged, one I immediately recognized as Paul. My heart stuttered in my chest as a sense of premonition washed over me. This was it. The moment I had been both eagerly anticipating and dreading in equal measure for months now. "What's going on?" Mark asked, clearly confused, as we got out of the truck. In my periphery, I noticed the second figure, a tall, broad-shouldered man around my age dressed in a rumpled suit, discreetly slip away into the shadows between our house and the neighbors. I hurried to stand next to Paul, an involuntary shiver passing through me as the reality of the situation took hold. "I'm really sorry about this, Mark," Paul said heavily, his expression grave as he pulled a thick manila envelope from the inside pocket of his well-worn bomber jacket. Judging by the dark circles under his eyes and grizzled 5 o'clock shadow, he'd been putting in around-the-clock hours on that big case of his. "Mark Thompson, you've been served." My husband froze, the color visibly draining from his face as he stared down at the envelope in his hands. "Is this a joke?" he asked, a humorless bark of disbelieving laughter escaping his lips. "Paul, what the hell?" "I'm afraid not, buddy." Paul's remorseful gaze flickered briefly in my direction before resettling on Mark. My pulse quickened at the glimpse of barely contained rage I saw simmering behind his eyes. "I think it's best if you go now. Get a lawyer, start working out the terms of your divorce." He cleared his throat roughly, as though forcing out the last word physically pained him. "There's also a temporary restraining order. You need to stay away from Vanessa and maintain at least 500 feet of distance." "A restraining order?" Mark repeated in a strangled whisper, as though the words made no sense to him at all. "This is insane." He turned to face me then, his green eyes, the same warm, inviting eyes I had fallen so hopelessly in love with as a naive teenager, flashing with hurt and bewildered anger. "Vanessa, why? What did I do?" I opened my mouth, but no words would come. My throat felt as though it were constricting, panic and shame welling up inside me until it became impossible to meet that broken, accusing stare any longer. I quickly looked away, the coward's way out as usual when faced with an uncomfortable truth. "Let's get you inside, Nessa," Paul said, squeezing my arm in a way that was probably supposed to be reassuring but made me flinch regardless. "This isn't easy for anyone." Here's the continuation with further development of the story. In my peripheral vision, I saw Mark try the front door, only to recoil as the lock held firm. "Your key won't work," Paul called out to him. "The locks have been changed." Mark froze, his back stiffening visibly as full comprehension of the situation washed over him. He spun around, eyes blazing with righteous fury. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" He spat, boring holes through me before whipping his accusing glare over to Paul. "I bet this was all your idea." Whispering in Vanessa's ear, turning her against me. "I always knew you were jealous of what we had." Despite his imposing physical presence, Paul maintained an outward veneer of composure, shifting closer to place himself bodily between Mark and me. "I'll have one of my guys escort you in to pack a bag," he said in that measured, authoritative cop voice of his. "But then you need to go, Mark. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I watched in silence, numb and detached, as Mark was shepherded inside by a uniformed officer. He re-emerged a few minutes later lugging a battered suitcase, which he flung haphazardly into the back of the U-Haul truck. He tore open the manila envelope, his eyes rapidly scanning the contents. "You cannot be serious," he said, looking back up at me with disbelief etched across his chiseled features. "You expect me to just give you half of everything? My company, our savings, the house, your car? After everything we've built together?" No way in hell, Vanessa. Mark, I'm warning you. Leave now or I'll have no choice but to arrest you, Paul said sternly, reaching for his handcuffs with a sense of resignation. Mark shot him a withering glare before seeming to deflate, the fight going out of him. Fine, he bit out. I'll sign the damn papers. He pulled a pen from his shirt pocket and scrawled his signature across the indicated lines in harsh, angry strokes. When he was finished, he thrust the documents back at Paul with barely contained contempt. You can be her witness. Paul dutifully signed on the appropriate line before handing over Mark's copy. My heart stuttered as my eyes drank in that damning signature. It was really happening. I was really going through with this. There would be no turning back now. I felt a thrill of triumph and something else, a strange sense of finality mixed with overwhelming loss. It was as though a vital piece of my soul had just been carved away, leaving an aching hollow space behind. You can have it all, Vanessa, Mark said, his words leaden. I hope it makes you happy. With those parting words, he turned and climbed into the truck, not even bothering to look back. I flinched as the engine roared to life and squealed away down the street, quickly disappearing around the corner and out of my life forever. As the lingering scent of exhaust fumes dispersed, a heavy silence descended over the driveway. Paul touched my shoulder, the concern in his blue eyes boring into me. Why don't you go on inside and try to relax? He murmured. I'll have a patrol car stationed outside tonight, just in case. We don't know how Mark will react. I managed a jerky nod, hugging my arms across my torso as I turned toward the house, my house now, obtained through the most underhanded of means. I paused in the doorway, glancing back over my shoulder at the man I once considered my closest friend. Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate your help. And thank Maggie for me too. The muscle in his jaw twitched almost imperceptibly at the mention of his wife's name. Don't mention it, was all he said. I let the door swing shut behind me, shutting out the rest of the world for one blissful, selfish moment. I reached into the pocket of my jeans with trembling fingers and pulled out my phone. With a deep, steadying breath, I dialed the newest number in my contacts list. It rang several times before going to voicemail. Ethan, it's me, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady and even. Everything went according to plan. Mark's gone and he signed the papers. I thought you'd be here by now. I paused, chewing my lip as waves of doubt and anxiety battered against me. Where was he? Ethan had promised he would be here waiting for me after it was all over. For months now, he had sworn up and down about wanting to start our new life together, with no more lies, no more sneaking around behind Mark's back like the past year had been. Finally, I would be truly free and we could stop existing in secret, stolen moments in sleazy motel rooms and the backseats of cars. Call me back as soon as you get this, I pleaded, unable to mask the quiver of panic in my voice now. I need you. I ended the call and reflexively started pacing the length of the bedroom, fingers pulling restlessly through my hair. Where the hell was he? Ethan was never one for unreliability or tardiness. Punctuality was a point of professional pride for him. 1,000 worst-case scenarios began playing through my mind on a maddening loop. Had he gotten cold feet? Decided this wasn't what he wanted after all, now that I had actually gone through and nuked my entire life to be with him? Had Mark somehow found out about us and confronted him? God, the thought of those two men coming to blows turned my veins to ice. Or worse, what if something terrible had happened? What if Ethan was hurt or in trouble somewhere? I violently shoved away the dark, spiraling thoughts, dropping down onto the edge of the bed as nausea churned in my gut. I needed a drink. Immediately. Steadying myself with a few deep, measured breaths, I headed downstairs to the butler's pantry just off the kitchen. A crystal decanter of amber liquid winked at me from the mahogany shelves, and I quickly retrieved it along with one of the matching tumblers from the cabinet below. As I settled onto the plush leather sofa in the tastefully appointed living room, I marveled at the quiet opulence surrounding me. Had this really been Mark's plan all along? To get me so accustomed to a certain lavish lifestyle that the allure of maintaining it would drive me into betraying him? A twisted part of me had to admire the subversive genius of it, in a tragically ironic way. I had sold my soul by my own willful choice, but he had expertly dangled the bait. As the first bracing sip of wine burned its way down my throat, my gaze landed on the large abstract canvas hanging above the fireplace. An original Jackson Pollock, I knew, one of Mark's most prized and valuable pieces from his private collection. The chaotic swirls and splatters of color seemed to mock me, a defiant representation of the turbulence roiling within me. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the buttery soft leather as memories of my affair with Ethan came flooding back in vivid flashes of whispered words and heated caresses. Our first meeting at the department store nearly a year ago while Mark was out of town on business, when I had felt that unmistakable spark of illicit attraction to the charming young sales associate. The countless hurried hotel trysts after that, fumbling between the sheets like horny teenagers behind closed doors while maintaining a veneer of propriety out in the real world. The constant deception had been intoxicating yet emotionally draining in a way I could never fully articulate. With each heated, passionate encounter, I found myself craving more of Ethan's youthful energy, his chiseled body, his easy charisma. Qualities that Mark increasingly lacked as the years ticked by and our lives became overly entrenched in monotonous routine. Don't get me wrong, I still loved my husband deeply. But the sad truth was that I was no longer in love with him. Not in the all-consuming, breathless, heedless way I once had been when we were just kids. My years-long affair was born from that simple, selfish truth. I couldn't bear the thought of living out my days as a depressingly cliched picture of suburban boredom, steadily suffocating in the airless prison of our stale yet materially comfortable marriage. When Ethan came along, I saw my chance at a do-over, an opportunity to recapture the thrilling passion of my long-departed youth. I instantly cast aside nearly 2 decades of vows and history with Mark in favor of getting hopelessly, recklessly carried away in the Ethan's potent spell. As ashamed as I now felt, there was still a part of me that desperately clung to the dream Ethan and I had so carefully constructed in those endless pillow talk conversations about our future together. He promised we would travel the world on his dime, living a carefree life of excitement and adventure, everything my life with Mark hadn't been for so long now. All I had to do was secure my half of our marital assets to fund our new beginning. And I had, at the staggering cost of sacrificing my entire old existence. I tried calling Ethan again, but still no answer. Frustrated, I decided to take a hot shower and try to calm my racing thoughts. I had done everything according to our plan. This was supposed to be our fresh start, our chance at happiness. He wouldn't just disappear on me now, would he? After my shower, I checked my phone again. Nothing. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. I poured another glass of wine and flipped through the TV channels. A breaking news alert caught my eye, a live report about a shooting. The ticker at the bottom of the screen made my blood run cold. Local detective arrested after killing wife and brother-in-law. I turned up the volume, my hands shaking. The reporter was standing outside a familiar house. Paul and Maggie's house. In a shocking turn of events, Detective Paul Davis has been taken into custody for the fatal shootings of his wife, Margaret Davis, and his brother-in-law, Thomas Wilkins. Police sources say Davis shot his wife in their home before driving to Wilkins' workplace and shooting him as well. Both victims were pronounced dead at the scene. The motive remains unknown at this time. I clicked off the TV, feeling numb. Maggie was dead. And Paul. I knew he and Maggie had their issues, but I never imagined he would snap like this. My mind reeled as I processed the news. My best friend was gone. My daughter was off at college. My husband had just walked out the door. And the man I thought I loved was nowhere to be found. I was completely and utterly alone. The next morning, I drove to Ethan's apartment, desperate for answers. When I unlocked the door, my stomach dropped. The place was totally empty, no furniture, no pictures on the walls, not a single trace of Ethan. It was like he had never existed. I sank onto the bare mattress, my mind spinning. How could I have been so stupid? So naive? I had thrown away my entire life for a man I barely knew. A man who had clearly been playing me from the start. Tears streaming down my face, I drove to the bank to assess the damage. My hands shook as I handed my ID to the teller. "I'm sorry, Ms. Thompson, but your accounts have been closed," the teller informed me with a sympathetic smile. "Your ex-husband was in here last week and emptied everything." He also had your name removed from all the credit cards and loans. But that's impossible, I argued. We have a joint account. And I'm the one who owns the house and my car. The teller shook her head. I'm afraid not. It appears that your husband took out a second mortgage on the house and had the car loan transferred solely to your name. You'll be responsible for those payments moving forward. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. In one fell swoop, Mark had stripped me of everything. I stumbled out of the bank in a daze, fumbling for my phone. With shaking fingers, I dialed Sophia's number. Surely my daughter would help me. What do you want? Her voice was cold and clipped. Sophia, honey, it's Mom. I need your help. Don't call me that, she snapped. You're not my mother. Not anymore. How could you do this to Dad? To our family? You ruined everything. Please, just let me explain. I don't want to hear it. Lose my number and don't ever contact me again. I'm done with you. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, tears blurring my vision. In the space of 24 hours, I had lost everything and everyone that mattered to me. My husband, my daughter, my best friend, even the man I thought I loved. 5 years later, I found myself standing in line at a dingy soup kitchen in the heart of Dallas, a tattered coat pulled tight around my thin frame. My once perfectly manicured nails were now chipped and ragged, my hair a tangled mess. I was a far cry from the polished, put-together woman I had been back in my old life. After losing everything, I had fled to Texas with the little cash I had managed to scrape together. I couldn't bear to stay in the same town where everyone knew of my disgrace. I thought I could start over, build a new life for myself. But without any real skills or experience, I quickly found myself struggling to make ends meet. I took whatever jobs I could find, waitressing, cleaning houses, even a brief stint as a gas station attendant. But it was never enough. I couldn't afford a decent place to live, so I found myself crashing on the couches of strangers or huddled in my car on the coldest nights. As I shuffled forward in the soup line, my stomach growling, I couldn't help but think back on all the mistakes I had made. How differently things might have turned out if I had just been content with the life I had. If I hadn't let myself be seduced by the promise of something more. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't notice the man standing in front of me until I nearly collided with him. Sorry, I mumbled, keeping my eyes downcast. Vanessa? My head snapped up at the sound of that familiar voice. I found myself staring into the shocked face of none other than Mark Thompson. He looked older, his hair graying at the temples, but still handsome in a distinguished way. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit, a stark contrast to the worn jeans and faded flannel shirt I had on. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I could ask you the same thing, he replied, his eyes taking in my haggard appearance. I'm here for a business meeting. My firm is designing a new shelter down the street. Of course. Mark had always been the successful one, the one with the bright future. While I had been busy throwing my life away, he had been building his empire. You look like you've seen better days, he remarked, not unkindly. I felt a flush of shame wash over me. I've been through a lot since everything happened. Mark's expression softened. I heard about Maggie and Paul. I'm so sorry, Vanessa. I know she was your best friend. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. Thank you, I managed to choke out. And I'm sorry too, Mark. For everything I put you through. I was selfish and stupid and I made the biggest mistake of my life. He was quiet for a moment, studying me intently. I forgave you a long time ago, Vanessa. Holding on to that anger wasn't doing me any good. I had to let it go and move on. Move on. The words echoed in my head as I realized the gold band gleaming on his left hand. You're married, I said softly. A smile touched his lips. 5 years now. Lila is an amazing woman. She's been a wonderful mother to Sophia. Sophia, I breathed. How is she? Does she ever ask about me? Mark's smile faded. I'm not going to lie to you, Vanessa. What you did really hurt her. It took a long time for her to trust again, to let Lila into her life. But they're very close now. Sophia just graduated from Columbia with honors. Pride and pain warred in my chest. My little girl, all grown up. A success in her own right. And I had missed it all. I'm glad, I said around the lump in my throat. I'm glad she's doing well. That she had you and Lila. She's the strongest person I know, Mark said. He glanced at his watch. Listen, I have to get going. But Vanessa, if you need help, if you want to get back on your feet, I want you to know that I'm here for you. Despite everything that happened between us, I don't want to see you suffer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, pressing it into my palm. This is the number for a women's shelter run by a friend of mine. They can help you find a job, a place to live. Give you a fresh start. Promise me you'll at least think about it. I stared down at the card, vision blurring with unshed tears. I promise, I whispered. And Mark? Thank you. For everything. He gave me a small nod, his hand brushing my shoulder briefly before he turned to go. I watched him walk away, his broad shoulders disappearing into the crowd. Looking down at the card in my hand, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Maybe it wasn't too late for me after all. Maybe I could still find a way to make things right. We're glad you joined us for today's video. If you like it, please let us know by clicking the like button and leaving a comment. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.